This has been at the age of 14, I started hearing about the traditional Native American doctors. Um, I knew at that time that this is what I wanted to do with my life. And so I just made the decision that if ever given the opportunity, that um, that's what I'm going to do. And so by the time I was 17, I took off and I ended up in southwestern Oklahoma and uh, I was living among some of the Kiowa people and going into the peyote meetings. And it was then that during the meetings, I met my mentor, Horace Daukei. And um, after, I wanted so much to train, but I didn't know that if Horace would be open, if he would, I was afraid that he would say that, well, you're not Native, you can't do these sorts of things. They only work for Native people. But actually, he was quite receptive. He knew at a time that I would be his apprentice. And so it was very intense experience. He would transmit portions of his own healing gifts to me. And then he would have me fast alone in the mountains for 4 days and nights without food and water. And in order to earn the right to work with these gifts of healing. And he would have me assist him with the people that he was working with. And I think I mentioned in another video, one man who was injured when a piece of heavy equipment turned over on him. The man had blood clots, in his legs. He was, paralyzed from the waist down. And so Horace had me, traditionally they would do things like sometimes they would make scratches on the skin, whatever, with sliver of glass or something. And then they would use like suction, like through a buffalo horn, and, extract the blood clots. And I was absolutely shocked when I saw the blood clots come out of the back of this guy's leg. But I was still very hesitant in the beginning to see or to get started, to begin to work with people on my own, because I just didn't know, if I had really received anything, or if I possessed any kind of gift or capability. But gradually, when I would tell people about my experience and my the time that I spent with Horace and the things that I had witnessed and that I'd experienced or done as well, and they would ask me if I would do work for them. It's like, kind of reluctantly, I would say, okay. and then people were sharing with me that how they were experiencing this. Some people would describe this like extraordinarily powerful presence coming into the room, and they were feeling all these changes within their bodies and stuff. And I was like, oh, okay, maybe I did get something. But see, the traditional Native American doctors were some of the most powerful doctors in the world, or healers in the world, let's say. And they were just extraordinary, in their gifts, their abilities. And all these Native Indigenous healers in different traditions work as conduits. And that means that they open up to allow a presence to work through them like other forces or beings. And so in doing that, they were able to facilitate healing that would not otherwise be possible. There's among the Native Americans, one I would say, every culture has its beauty and its crazy dysfunction. And one of the downsides of Native American culture is just the warfare. It was brutal, and the tribes were fighting each other constantly. I don't know if that was all the tribes throughout the country. Maybe some tribes like the Hopi, I get the impression were more peaceful, but a lot of the Plains tribes, it's like, damn, it was just relentless. They were, relentlessly attacking one another. And, but some of these doctors had this ability so that if somebody was wounded in battle, they could actually extract the projectile, and they could do things like they could seal the wound. And there's, I've heard many miraculous accounts. I witnessed it with my mentor as well. He would, instances where people had cancer, leukemia, people weren't expected to live, and he would work with them, and they would see people recover. And times where, I think I mentioned before, the video, one man was like hugely swollen, open infected wound, and I saw the first installment when you worked with him in the sweat lodge, and so the guy's leg shrunk way down. And so I wasn't there for parts 2, 3. I'm not sure how many times he worked with them, but anyway, it was a profound difference. And then being allergic to bee stings, he puts his hand on my wrist, and so the swelling goes down on my wrist. It was pretty big to start with, and usually it would take me, I don't know, a week or so. It's been a long time since I've been stung, but to get rid of that, and he just put his hand on my wrist, and my wrist goes down to normal, and then he takes the swelling into his wrist, and it goes, it pops up. He takes that swelling in his wrist, and then in about 30 minutes, his goes down to normal. So Horace would do like all these amazing things, but a lot of these native doctors were extraordinarily powerful. So that was pretty commonplace. And there were many of these doctors. I mean, what would happen is that these traditional doctors, towards the end of their lives, they would they wanted to see these gifts are passed on to the future generations. So what they would do is they would transmit that power to a younger apprentice. And then they would have the apprentice, as Horace did with me, go through the vision quest to earn the right to work with that healing gift or power, or those powers. And around 1870s, and 80s, they were herding the last of the tribes onto these reservations, and the conditions were horrendous. They weren't allowing the native people to practice their traditional rituals, such as the sun dance or anything. And so a lot of this had to go underground, and they were taking the children away and putting them in boarding schools, and often shipping them off to other parts of the country. And so many of these children, families didn't get to see each other for indefinite periods of time. And some of them didn't return. A number of these children died at the boarding schools even. But the old native doctors, they wanted so much to pass this on, but these children were taken away pretty early, and so sometimes they would try to transmit these gifts to a child that was very young, but their bodies and minds were not yet in a place where they could be receptive to those gifts or healing powers. And then by the time they came back from the boarding schools, they were so indoctrinated that and had internalized so much shame after being beaten and humiliated because of their language and their traditional culture. And a lot of them just wanted to adapt to the modern world. And of course, there was the issue with alcoholism. Not having alcohol a part of their experience for thousands and thousands of years, they hadn't built up the tolerance to alcohol like you find among Europeans and peoples of other races have. And so, the alcoholism was really taking a toll as well. So a lot of these native doctors, what happened is they ended up taking a lot of these gifts or healing powers to the grave with them. And sadly, much of this has died out. There's very few people practicing at this level in North America at this time. And my mentor, Horace Daukei, he was actually the last of the really powerful doctors. There were a few others, but I don't think they were anywhere close to where Horace was in his abilities or capabilities when it came to facilitating healing. And I think among the Navajos and Pueblo tribes, there are some powerful doctors, but I don't know recently. It's dying out. There's still more, like in parts of South America, if you go down into like parts of Brazil, Peru, and some of these other countries, there's still some very powerful doctors down there. It's something to explore, if it interests you and stuff. But as I said, Horace transmitted portions of his own healing gifts to me. And then, it was so intense. And after a couple of years, I put myself back into college, and I needed time to assimilate everything I'd gone through, what he had transmitted to me, all the kind of ordeals he put me through. He put me through a lot of intense survival training. And I was slow to work into my practice. But as I said, people would begin to ask me, will you help me with this or that? And I just kind of like, okay, I'll see what I can do. And by the time I was graduating from college, it was like, wow, I don't have student financial aid to survive off of. I have to actually make a living. So I better actually start working with people. And in the beginning, I didn't really know a lot. And that was part of the reason I was, slow to start out. But, Horace had said to me, I can't explain everything or show you everything you need to do. You actually need to get in there and just start working with people. It's going to reveal itself to you. And so as I did, I learned an enormous amount. I mean, I started working on my own 35 years ago. By the way, I'm recording this in New York City, so I probably couldn't do a recording if my life depended on it without some background noise. There's a siren going off. And so there's ambulances, there's police cars, there's fire trucks. And so So it's, I don't know if it's coming through on the microphone, but I hear it, so maybe you will too. So anyway, so people would come to me with this, over the years, with everything imaginable. I guess nobody's showed up with elephantitis or something. Times when I've been in India and Sri Lanka, and I see people afflicted with some of these conditions that are pretty horrifying. I mean, and they don't have any kind of social safety net in some of these countries. And I remember seeing one man, and his limbs were literally like that big around or something. And I think to grab people's attention, he just had them kind of splayed out in different directions or crossed over or something. It's been a while since I saw him. And he's just laying on the side of the road begging, hoping people throw some change or some bills in there for him. And see other people, and I think that's elephantitis, and their parts of their limbs are that big around, and like their legs or their something. It's, you see a lot of things there, all of which I will not go into. But anyway, over the years, like I said, people come to me with all kinds of things. And in the beginning, I just didn't know what. I just didn't really know or understand that much about what I was working with. But people would come, can you help me with this? And even to this day, now I have, as I said, 35 years of experience, and people still show up from time to time with something that's new or unfamiliar. And it's like, oh, okay. And I just like, and when I work with people, I'm cautious. I don't make promises. I'm not going to promise to cure somebody. I know some things, I've worked with so much, some things are like digestive and respiratory issues usually respond very well to this type of healing practice. I've worked with a lot of people who have been injured in automobile accidents, and they've made profound recoveries. But I don't know everything. I'm not familiar with every type of condition, and there are some things that I can't work with. That and if that's the case, if someone asks me, if I know, I'll tell them straight out. If I know that there are other resources that I feel are better suited, I'm going to I'll steer them in that direction if there are other practitioners or if there are other forms of resources or whatever, because I want people to get the help they need. But anyway, so I want to share some of the things that, people ask me, can you help me with this? Can you help me with that? So I wanted to share some of the many things that I've worked with over the years. And instead of just saying, okay, reading through the list straight down, I'll actually share accounts of some of the things that I work with, like some of the actual experiences of working with different individuals. And now, one of the things that is typical is that when you have people with various health-related issues, there's often an emotional component. I think on some degree there always is. Some people believe that all illness is caused by emotions. No, I don't believe that at all. I think some things are just environmental. Some things are hereditary. So there are many causes of illness. So no, definitely not all illnesses are caused by emotion. No, it's not karma or whatever. It's just, I think there are many causes. Again, there's hereditary causes. These days we're exposed to so many environmental toxins, the frequency of cancer is just horrifying. And, it wasn't that prevalent in, centuries ago. And people died of other maladies or conditions, primarily, and all. But anyway, let me get started with that. So, yeah, sometimes people come to me with headaches, migraines, for instance. I was working with a woman from Eastern Europe, and I started with her. And at the beginning, I'd say, especially after working with her, I'd ask her how she felt. And she'd say, "I feel half dead." But I was seeing gradual improvement, and she actually improved dramatically over time. The migraines kept decreasing in frequency and in severity, and she got to where she was much stronger, more resilient. I mean, before she just had this debilitating fatigue, and she was in a marriage to a man who was, I don't know that I spent that much time around him, but he just, my impression was that he was very narcissistic by the time I did interact with him. And that I remember one interaction, it just felt like he was just sucking the life out of me. So maybe that was a big part of it. But this woman got strong enough, that she actually moved out. She divorced him and got a place on her own in a foreign country, being here in the United States. And she built her own business. So again, that's, an example of, like I said, you have people suffering various physical conditions, but often there's a history, and there was a history, extensive history of trauma from her upbringing, growing up in the former Soviet Union. But in any case, let's see, let's move right along. Sports injuries. I've seen that a lot. There's a woman who worked on, or who was on the ski team at the University of New Mexico. And this is way back, about 30 years ago. But she had injured herself in that sacroiliac joint, where the sacrum and the ilium, the sacrum is the triangular shaped bone in the base of your spine, and the ilium is where your hip attaches to it. So that joint was pulling apart. Is that really a joint? Or, well, it's an attachment anyway. And so it's causing her a lot of pain. So I worked with her, and she re-injured after the first time. I worked with her to address that issue, and the second time it held. And I saw her for some time afterwards. She never complained about that ever again. I've worked with a lot of people that have been injured in automobile accidents. Ideally, when someone's injured in an automobile accident, that's intense to see, because, there's all the physical injuries that result from the accident. But when people are in these collisions, it's like that first layer of the aura is like, it's like this intricate meshwork that supports the structural and functional integrity of all the organs and systems. It's just kind of holds everything in place, and that will be all ripped up. You see it's very damaged. And what they call the chakras, these energy structures and the subtle bodies, and those are often damaged, all that. And so and again, damage to internal organs, damage to injuries to the neck and ligaments and spine and so on, and everything. So I remember one instance where this man was in a collision. He was broadsided, and the impact was so great that the seatbelt snapped, and he flew out of the Jeep, and he landed on the pavement, and he slid on the pavement. And so he had these huge road rashes, where the flesh was just worn away on his right thigh. And so the guy was just in his, I don't know, mid to late 20s, and he was in so much pain. He was like hunched over and he's walking like a 80-year-old man. And I'd known his sister. She told me about what happened, and I ran into his mom, and she's asked about him. She said he's in the car if you want to see him. And so I brought him into Whole Foods. I used to read people's auras sitting in Whole Foods in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And so I just sat him down in a chair and went to work, and he was just like, and just astounded, like he was saying, like, wow, this is the first thing that even helped me. He's talking about how he felt pain being pulled out of his body. He said the physical therapy he'd been doing was like torture, but he felt the relief after, that few minutes of working with him. But then I scheduled a session with him, went over to his home. And after that first session, he was able to go back to work doing construction. Alleviated so much of the discomfort, and I could see the road rash had shrunk down quite a bit after that first session. His case, I just worked with him 2 times, but it was pretty dramatic recovery there. But what I said about the subtle bodies, like a lot of times people are in automobile accidents, and that first layer of the aura, that structure in the subtle bodies kind of supports the structural functional integrity of the of all the, the musculature, the skeletal system, the organs, all that. And so when that's all ripped up, then you'll see things like the spine, the vertebrae keep going out of alignment, and the person has to keep going back in for chiropractic adjustments. And so part of what happens, in addition to repairing the physical damage from the injuries, there's also repairing the damage in the subtle bodies. I hope that makes sense. But when you do work like this, it's like your vision opens so that you're able to see a lot more than most people can, anyway. Let's see, what else? Back pain, spinal injuries. Yeah, another man who was injured in an automobile accident, and he had damage to the spinal cord itself. And when he described his accident, he said that he was in a head-on collision. The impact was so great that his head was slammed against the windshield, and the headband he was wearing was stuck in the broken glass. He came to momentarily, and as he was being loaded into the ambulance, but that had been years prior to my meeting him. And so someone else I'd been working with referred me to him. So as I started working with him, what he was suffering, like, is still enormous physical pain, from the damage to his spinal cord. And he would at times just have to take off from work, just incapacitated by it. And then as I continued to work with them, that pain kept reducing to the point where he no longer experienced it. After working with them for some time, he would go in for chiropractic adjustments maybe once or twice a month, just to keep, his all the vertebrae, his neck and back in line and stuff. But he was no longer in pain, so he was extraordinarily grateful for that. And occasionally I get to work with people with traumatic brain injuries. That's actually one of my favorite things to work with. Traumatic brain injuries the process can be slower and more tedious than other conditions, but I find it immensely rewarding, enjoyable. There's this fascination on my part to see, like, what difference can we make? How much can we recover in terms of their restoring their ability to function and all that? Because remember working with one individual that he was a lot of difficulty as far as like mental clarity, being able to learn or to retain information or to remember anything, and just extreme exhaustion. And so as I worked with him, at first he enrolled in a school to become a massage therapist, and he just didn't have the stamina and he couldn't retain any information. And so he had to drop out. But after working with him, he was able to go back to school, and he passed anatomy and physiology, did quite well, and was able to hold up doing long shifts as a massage therapist. He was working, had the massage chair, and I think he was working in a mall or something. And another woman, in this case, she suffered from meningitis that had occurred some years prior, but had done quite a bit of damage. So when I started with her, she would, to listen to her was kind of frustrating, because she would say a few words and just kind of wander off and get lost in space somewhere, and it would take her forever to complete a thought. But as I continued to work with her, as she continued to progress, she basically sounded like a normal person. And what else? And also working with people who have suffered from stroke. There's some similar thing, that when people have suffered as a result of a stroke, there's often damage in parts of the brain. And so there's, loss of speech and a loss of mobility. So I work with a lot of these individuals, and just seeing them regaining that physical mobility, regaining speech and cognitive facilities. So I like being challenged. It's like when I see these individuals, sometimes it hurts a bit, that I do this work because I care about people, and it's hard to see people suffer. But then, but as I said, there's that curiosity and there's that fascination. There's a deep desire, like, okay, what can we do? What can I do to facilitate this person's healing? How much progress can we make? And so I very, very much like to work with people that have these really serious health challenges, to see how much of a difference we can make to facilitate their recovery. Yes, I'm saying we, because when you work as a healer, you're acting as a conduit, and you're allowing this, as I said, all the indigenous healers working as conduits, I do too, so allowing this presence to work through me to facilitate healing within the body and mind that wouldn't otherwise occur. Now, people have asked me too, what do you experience, or what should I expect to experience when I'm doing this work? And throat's feeling a little dry, and it varies, because I have people that spent their whole lives, just shutting down emotionally, numbing out, because they don't want to feel, they don't want to go there emotionally. And that can be challenging sometimes, because when people shut down emotionally, they're just not as aware. They tend to be more numbed. And so they may not feel as much, but other people that I work with, that are, are more in touch with their own emotions and feelings, tend to experience all kinds of vivid, intense sensations. And some people would describe experiencing something, they would say that it felt as though that some kind of surgery was taking place within their physical body and stuff. And, they could feel an actual regenerative process occurring. So let's keep moving along. What other things should I cover here? So working with people that suffered heart attacks, and maybe there's a lot of constriction or chest pain. So after working with them, there's the alleviation. I know a composer friend in Germany that one of my favorite composers. I reached out to him at one point. I actually got to meet him and spend time with him and stay in his guest house in Frankfurt. So working with him, he was experiencing like a lot of constriction in his chest, and so working with him, it alleviated that. And I don't think he's ever complained or about those issues again. And I've known him for God, how long now? I think 27 years or so, something like that. And what else? Respiratory issues. A lot of people with struggling to breathe, difficulty, constricted lungs. I don't know if I said that, articulated that very well. There's another friend that he suffered asthma, and I think a lot of that had to do with a lot of the trauma of his past, in his case. And so he, after working with them some time, he also ended up going to do the Vision Quest, which is the training that I go on, where you go out the 4 days and nights to fast without food and water. So he actually ended up going 7 times. And after his second time that he went, asthma was kicking in so bad that he could hardly breathe. And I told him, go see an acupuncturist till I get back to town. He was living in Boston. He didn't listen. But when I got back and worked with him, the asthma cleared up, and I think he indicated he had some sort of brief mini episodes or something, but years have gone by. He's he's got through that. I mean, it resolved or it cleared up. And he also had cat allergies, and after working with him, he actually had a cat sleeping in his bed. So that he and his housemates had taken in. Digestive issues usually respond real well. There are exceptions, and those exceptions being that sometimes you have people that are dealing with an enormous amount of stress or upset or have a history of trauma, and they just don't want to go there, don't want to feel. I know one man I was working with, for example, when he suffered from ulcerative colitis, his passing blood in his stools was in a great deal of pain. And so after, I think it was like 5 or 6 sessions, and it was like this dramatic recovery. I mean, he was no longer in pain or passing blood in his stools. A woman that I had worked with for quite some time, in her case, given this example, this is what happens when people shut down emotionally. And I think a lot of it happened growing up in an extremely dysfunctional environment, a lot of emotional, psychological abuse. And so I would have her do this practice, to get her into her body, and to connect with their emotions, to process those emotions. And that's so crucial. Healing is a joint venture here. It's a team effort, and it's not enough to just lay on the table and just have me come in and just zap you and okay, you're healed. It's like there's practice you need to do. You need to do your part, and that makes you a lot more, your body more malleable, receptive, your body and mind. And so I'd have her close her eyes and get into her emotions, and bring some of these issues that were triggering her to the forefront of her awareness. And so she'd have her eyes closed about 5-10 minutes, like, can I open my eyes now? And so it was very difficult to get her to do practice. In her case, it took 1.5 years, which is just, you know, way longer than it ever would need to take. As I said, some other people, 5, 6 sessions, and they're suffering from colitis, ulcerative colitis or Crohn's disease, and impacted bowel, have this abdominal bloating and distension. We clear all this up, and in her case, it took longer because of being so shut down emotionally. But, before, just so limited as to what she could eat. In the beginning, she could only eat rice, chicken, sweet potato, banana, and then after working with her some time, she got to where she could eat pretty much anything within reason. She got to that point. She got carried away with the cake and ice cream and stuff, and then after gaining a little weight, it's like, no, I don't want to be chunky. So then she started eating more healthily then, fortunately. But yeah, digestive issues normally respond very well in most instances. And what else did I? Ovarian cysts and fibroids. Quite a few women I've worked with have told me that they've either shrunk down or disappeared. It varies. So sometimes these fibroids grow, and if I understand correctly, or I don't know, they develop this, like, well, I don't want to go into the anatomy of it so much, but they can get, grow to the size of like a fetus or something, or unborn child. They could get pretty massive. And once a fibroid is that big, at that point, I think it's best thing, surgical removal. And I believe they're able to do that laparoscopically, if I say that correctly, I pronounced that right. So I just want to be realistic here. And let's see, autoimmune disorders. Not all, but I think a certain percentage of a lot of these people that report autoimmune disorders, I think a lot of that has to do with past trauma. Quite a good percentage of the individuals that I've worked with who have had histories of trauma have experienced or that are struggling with autoimmune disorders have histories of past trauma, and it's like their bodies just shut down, and they would be experiencing all these symptoms, and they they're going to the conventional Western medical establishment, asking for assistance, seeking help, to treat what they're going through. And I think the physicians are just doing the best they can to come up with some diagnoses, and so I'd work with a lot of these individuals, and as we began to uncover a lot of the trauma and to heal the traumatic wounding itself, a lot of the highly charged emotion that's held in the body, and their bodies just function a lot better. Now, there's another man, though, and here's the example. Like, again, not all conditions have their basis in they're not based on some kind of emotional wounding. There's a man in New York that I met in a workshop, and I got to work with him one time, and he soon thereafter left for Germany. He was where he was enrolled in some kind of a master's degree program or something, and he wasn't able to continue with the program because he just wasn't functioning. So he ended up back living at his mother's house. He was suffering this debilitating fatigue. And so as I was working with him, he was becoming much stronger, more physically resilient, and he was regaining his mental clarity, and he was able to go back to school, enter a master's degree program in the Chicago area in filmmaking. And he earned his master's degree. And last I saw him briefly when he came back to the country, that he was working in, I forget whether it's Hong Kong or Taiwan or something. How long ago was that? 15, 20 years ago. I mean, 35 years of working. Sometimes I forget some details. Cancer I have very mixed experience with. I've had people who were in the very latter stages, I mean, just riddled with cancer. One woman was, they had her on the maximum dose of morphine. Her daughter called me like, it was just right at the very tail end. And so I went over, and I could see that she was on her way out. I mean, it was obvious. And so I began to work with her, and that was an intense experience. Like, I could feel that, during that session, that she was like processing a whole lifetime of experience. And there was all this physical movement in her body, and I could feel that processing that was taking place. Again, of her life experience, I could feel it happening emotionally, because I'm very empathic. And it's like telepathically, I was saying to her, like, look, I know you're on your way out the door, but just wait till after I go, because, in the medical establishment, if you're a healer and you're working with people, and sometimes they've gone after people, healers and stuff. So, but anyway, the next day, she, or after working with her, she actually conversed coherently with with me, her daughter, her son-in-law. Before, she was just out of it because, being on such a strong dose of morphine and the excruciating pain, which the morphine was limited in its ability to help her numb that. But anyway, I spoke with her daughter later on. The daughter said the next day that she was speaking, like engaging with her and her son-in-law, and she sat up on her own, and with some help, she actually took a bath. She was actually pain-free, and she said, the daughter told me that her mother was at peace, and she said that evening that that her mother was back in bed, and that her spirit started to like withdraw from her extremities, and there was a shortness of breath, and her mother passed out gracefully, left the body without all that excruciating pain that she had experienced previously. And so the daughter called me, and she was very grateful for that the session helped her to make that transition and to do so much more comfortably. There's another woman that I'd worked with in Kansas City. She had been diagnosed with bone marrow cancer and was given just a few years to live. And so I used to live in Kansas City, but at that point, I would just stop in a few times a year. But I was, as I was working with this woman, it ended up prolonging her life. She actually ended up living 12 years. And at the end, as I said, it was challenging because there, at the latter part, she had this abdominal distension. She would look like she was a couple months pregnant or something. And her daughter had bought her maternity pants, and I'd come into town, I'd work with her, and her stomach would flatten out, and then she'd usually do about 3 sessions per visit, and then and so those other sessions, she'd like I said, she was wearing more normal clothing, whatever. But yeah, her son took me out to lunch after his mother passed, and said, my sister and I want to thank you because we know we wouldn't have had her mother all this time without your intervention. I have had other people just go into remission indefinitely as I was working with them. And there's a woman in Brooklyn that I'd worked with for quite some time that breast and uterine cancer that was just holding pretty steadily when she got COVID. And, when she, after getting COVID, she went out, the COVID killed her basically. But for over 5 years, she pretty much stayed in remission there. And another woman that I've worked with, she had originally called me to work with her daughter, and they removed a tumor from her occipital lobe, and surgically, and they did radiation to make sure they killed off any other cancerous cells. And so there was loss of vision, difficulty standing, walking. She couldn't drive. And then after working with her, she was regaining much of her vision so she could read again. She was able to stand and walk and drive. So again, healing is a team effort here. So, I'll work with people with cancer, but at the same time, it's also important to, again, there are many causes. Sometimes there could be emotional wounding or trauma can factor into it, but there's also environmental causes. Diet's a big issue here. So it's very important that we, when addressing cancer, that we clean up our diet, which I can't go into the full extent in this video covering that, but also addressing a lot of the emotional wounding and like cleaning up some of the dysfunctional relational dynamics in our lives. So the other thing too is I work with a lot of people with a whole range of emotional based issues, trauma and such. And but often there's an overlap. There's the physical, there's the emotional, and so there's this kind of overlap between the two. It's hard to separate them in many instances. There's a man in the Boston area who suffered a debilitating stroke. He was incapacitated. Now, this guy had a long history of just horrible relationships, and he was just, he got a pretty raw deal and was very much taken advantage of, had enormous amount of resentment. So after working, or after the stroke, actually, he had the rage and the anger coming out of him was like it would peel the paint off the walls. It was, I'm talking metaphorically, but sometimes just being around him, even though it wasn't directed at me, I just felt like just kind of blasted by it. But after working with him, or as I worked with him, that anger, that bitterness was decreasing tremendously, and he was becoming a lot more relaxed, much calmer, and the stroke symptoms were abating, and he was more functional. He was able to do what he needed to do. And but what was amazing is that he ended up connecting with this woman, and how long ago was that? I think 5 years ago now, probably at the time of this video recording. And he's been with her ever since. I think it's the first good, healthy relationship he's ever been in. So it was that, on one hand, addressing the symptoms of stroke that he suffered, and the other hand, cleaning up all this toxic emotional mess. And a lot of times what happens is, when we're younger, our bodies are much stronger, we're more resilient. But as we get older, what happens is, like, especially if we suffer some debilitating illness, like cancer or stroke or heart disease, it's like all the defense mechanisms that we built up over the years, that just crumbles, it dissolves. And so just years and years of all this emotional wounding, trauma, it just all comes out. And it's intense. It's a huge mess to clean up, because it's working with the physical, it's working with the emotional. It's like all that stuff simultaneously. So it's an enormous amount of work, that has to be done. Again, it's like a lot to clean up. So I work with many people with depression, and there's the broken brain model or theory of depression. I was listening to this book called Lost Connections by Johann Hari. I highly recommend that book, by the way. It's very good, Lost Connections by Johann Hari. And he's describing, like, he was on antidepressants for years, and he talked about how he gained a lot of weight, he bloated up, and how it affected his dietary habits and all this. And, supposedly antidepressants only work, for a small percentage of the people. And the pharmaceuticals have promoted that broken brain myth, and and they stilted the research findings to favor the antidepressants, so they can make billions and billions of dollars. So it's criminal. But in any case, and Johann was talking about this too. I see this all the time. I'll be working with people, and no, I don't think it's everyone, but a large percentage of people who experience depression. He's pointing out a number of different causes: loneliness, alienation, hardship, things like loss of a job. People get older, they become shut in. Losing those connections with friend and family. And in this day and age, when people don't connect as much anymore, because they're on their damn smartphones and they're scrolling through social media all the time and other online content. And then there's also just people experience like so much trauma and other emotional wounding. And so oftentimes what happens is the depression and also anxiety is often like a byproduct of this traumatic wounding. And so as I'm working with people, and it's facilitating the healing of the trauma, the emotional wounding, as I work with people, again, I work as a conduit, allowing this presence to work through me. So it's the individual I'm working with, you go into this dream state, and you're digesting that trauma, those traumatic events. You're digesting all that heavy emotion that's you've held within your body all those years. And it's facilitating changes within the brain's biochemistry, within the neural structure of the brain. So you get to where you're able to process all that emotion. And so as that happens, there's a much greater sense of lightness, ease. You become more highly functional. So people suffering from anxiety, depression, that are experiencing a lot of these symptoms, the nightmares, the flashbacks, the panic attacks, there's a diminishment or lessening of those symptoms. And in many instances, they disappear altogether. And so people who were once highly traumatized, they get to where they're so much calmer, and they're more at peace, and they're at ease, and they get where before they were debilitated, could barely function. I work with these individuals, and they get to where they're highly functional. I find that incredibly gratifying to see that change in people. It's a process. With somebody with that severe trauma, it could take a year, maybe a couple of years even, to facilitate that change. But hey, the time is going to pass anyway. You don't do the work, then you remain in that traumatized state. You continue, the anxiety, panic attacks, and all that. You keep suffering. You do the work, then you heal. And then it completely transforms you and your life. So it's your choice. Do you want to stay, continue to suffer, or do you want to do what it takes to heal and get your life and develop the resources and capabilities to fulfill your life's purpose and realize your potential? So, what else? I've worked with bipolar disorders. I don't have as much understanding of that. I know I have this one friend that I worked with for years, and severely bipolar ADHD, just so hugely dysfunctional. Just in the course of working with him, he too was able to, I think it was a combination of that, HIV meds, and all that, but seeing him become much more functional. Grief, loss. I work with a lot of people who've gone through breakups, divorces, patterns of abandonment, rejection, unrequited love, especially when we suffered a lot of abuses growing up, a lot of neglect, experience of abandonment. Often those patterns repeat in our romantic, intimate relationships, and it becomes hardwired, and we continue to attract the same types of individuals or reenact those same kinds of patterns in our intimate relationships. And so what I find is, as I work with people, is that it does this repatterning. It just creates this whole new internal model. And I'll see people let go of unhealthy partners, and they're able to heal and transform that grief and sadness. They come out much lighter. And I've had many of these individuals, as I work with them, they end up attracting partners who are much more loving and supportive, and whom they're able to establish more meaningful and more deeply fulfilling relationships. And dissociative disorders. Well, many people don't quite meet the clinical classification of dissociative disorder, but people who undergo surgery a lot of times, that's an invasive trauma to the body. And automobile accidents, if we experience a lot of neglect or physical abuse, a lot of us don't fully inhabit our bodies. And so I'll work with people, and it pulls people into their bodies. They get more integrated and become more resourceful and more highly functional. One woman that I've worked with quite a bit, she was experiencing what you call divided identity disorder. It used to be called multiple personality. And that was amazing in many ways. She would see, or how do I describe it? She had this obsessive fear that someone was repeatedly breaking into her house and stealing items, and then they would just disappear, and so she assumed someone was breaking in and stealing all this stuff from her and doing it repeatedly. And then what was even more maddening is some of these items would reappear in different places, and sometimes back in the same location at a later date. And she had this really elaborate, expensive security apparatus, and she would watch the video feeds for hours. And so I'd be, as I was working with her, and as that wounding was healing, is or part of it I should add a little more in is that what happens when a person experiences a divided identity disorder, there's that extreme trauma, and so there's this fracturing in the psyche. Parts of the self split off or fracture in a sense. Separate personalities, they operate out of separate neurotracts of the brain. They have their own thought processes and feelings and worldview. And often there's this partition or barriers between the separate different parts of the self or individual. And so they don't communicate all that well with each other, if at all. And so in working with their, and as the fracturing heals and there's the integration of these parts of the self, as that happened, there was this understanding that she came to understand that, oh, there is no one breaking in the house. There is no other person taking these items and, stealing them or bringing them back at a later date or whatever. That was me all along. And so, I work with people with sometimes schizophrenia. I've had some individuals that, and I can't say it's 100% like they're no longer schizophrenic, but they have that tendency, but they're able to function at a much, much higher level within that, I don't know, lack of a better term, within that context. And I've seen some be able to get off the medications and, become pretty functional in their lives in many respects. So again, I enjoy working with people with this wide range of different experiences, health concerns, and whether physiological or pertain to their emotional wounding. And realize I have an appointment coming up pretty soon here, so I have to wrap this up pretty quick. But the people ask me what the sessions are like. I usually start by scanning the physical body. I'm able to look into the physical and subtle bodies. I scan the body through my hands. I have this internal vision where I'm able to sense into the body and mind. I could see where a person's at, what kind of resources they possess. I could see how they're wounded emotionally, their ability to cope. I can see the specific emotions and kind of wounding they're dealing with. And then each time I work with a person, I could see this progression that occurs and how they're developing greater resources and capabilities and such. So the first I do that scanning and I'm reading what's going on in the body and mind. The second part of the healing process, I'm teaching people this whole series of practices, meditation practices I developed that awaken the innate healing intelligence within the body and mind. Working with these practices opens you up so that you become far more receptive to the healing process. These practices are, again, awaken your body and mind's innate healing intelligence. They facilitate the healing on an emotional and physical level. Incredibly valuable resource that you can, or series of resources you can take with you for the remainder of your life that are going to help you in many ways deal with the challenges that you face in your life, your emotional responses, your physical body. Very important to do these practices. And the main part of the work is where I have people on the table. It's a hands-on part where people are laying on the table, and that presence comes through me. As I said, some people feel that presence working within the body to do regenerative work within on a physical level, on an emotional level. It's taking those deeply wounding experiences, past traumas, and it's taking that content, is literally transforming it so that you can thoroughly digest it, you integrate it, it becomes a functional part of your life, it becomes fuel for growth. And even as I said, I work with people from a wide range, those who experience a great deal of trauma, people who are already highly functional. And I see people continually develop more resources, become even that much more functional. And I very much enjoy too working with people, artists, writers, people, entrepreneurs, um, because I see people excel and go that much further in their careers now, uh, developing, realizing their true potential. So anyway, I got to wrap this up because I have an appointment coming up here. So depending on where you see this video, if you see it on Facebook or YouTube, or some other platform, I'll post a link below, and you can, if you'd like to get in touch with me, talk about working with me, or talk with me about working individually, we can do that. You know, I'll talk with you. If I can't be, if I'm not able to assist you, I'll just tell you straight out. If I can be of assistance, I'll tell you exactly how I could be of assistance to you. And you know, you can share with me, give some thought what it is that you would, what your specific concerns are, what you would like to achieve. And also, you may see this video posted on a page where you could specifically sign up for what I'm calling the challenge resolution session. So again, if it's on Facebook, YouTube, some other platform, you'll just see the link below. And if it's if it's on the page I created, then just look for the button that says challenge resolution session. Schedule your session with me, and we'll get into it.